Hello, everybody. Steve here from CSC, and I'm going to talk today about what I think is perhaps the end of the church in America. And a lot has happened in this past year, especially as it relates to the pandemic, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But before we even get into that, let me talk about the decline of the church. I think even before the pandemic, to tell you the truth, I noticed a lot of things, and what we'll look at real quickly is some research from the Pew Institute, and they do a Pew Research Institute, and they do a lot of analysis on church attendance and things related to the church. So let me just show that to you for a minute while I talk to you about what all of this means. I don't know if you, hopefully you can see that. I'll minimize my face, don't need to see that. Okay, and in this research article, which was done, I think, in 2019, so it was way before the pandemic, and in it is talking about the decline of the church Christianity in America at a very rapid pace. And I'll leave a link in the description to where you can actually see this article. But I want to show you some of the actual research that they came up with. So let me pull that up real quick. Okay, so the first thing I noticed, one of the things that I noticed is that in this set of data, they're saying that white Democrats are far less religious than Black and Hispanic Democrats. And so a lot of the things that the Democratic Party is doing, they're basically following leftist propaganda, or at least the main Democrats are, and they have a tremendous amount of influence on the direction of the Democratic Party. But what this is saying, and of course we know that although there are many prominent Black Democrats in the Democratic Party, it is the white Democrats that basically put forth the policy and lead in the direction of this. And I mean, there are some Black leaders in the Democratic Party who are very influential, and some minority, as you might notice. People like Ocasio-Cortez in New York and a few others are very influential in the party. But in terms of their religious beliefs, you don't hear a lot about matters of faith coming from Democrats. It's more so the leftist policy, which in my opinion is diametrically opposed to anything Christian. So let me just pull up another study, which I think might even be a little more impactful. And let me see if I can enlarge this a little bit for you. Okay, and what this is showing is the large generation gap in religion in America. And as you can see down through the years, through the various generations born from 28 to 45, the percentage of Christianity in that group was fairly high. But as you see down through the years, you can see that number is on a steady decline. So from the baby boomers, those born between 46 and 64, which is actually my generation, it was down to 76. And then you get the Generation X, it's down to 67. And then there was a tremendous jump in the millennials which are those born, I believe, in 1981 through 96, and it's down to 49%. So all of this kind of belies the fact of the precipitous increase in those who are not Christian in this country, and that number appears to be only growing. And so what does this all mean? As I said earlier, the pandemic showed me a lot about all of this, and it kind of, what it actually did was allow me to see the precipitous fall of Christianity in the United States. The pandemic showed me that the decline in church is real. And some of the reasons that I think this is that, number one, the church did not stand up during the pandemic. Churches were closed down. Most of them voluntarily closed down. And I think a big part of that was that, number one, the church was fearful of the pandemic itself. And I'm not saying that the church should have done anything that was so outlandish that would have really caused a spike. But as we're now finding out, it was actually not that easy to catch the coronavirus, in the air or outside or outdoors, and that for the most part, it was transmitted in places like home, in closed-in places. And that was the main source of passing the virus. It didn't really lend itself to being passed around outside. And so we see churches, even large edifices that had the space to socially distance, as they say, did not. They were closed. I mean, there were a few churches that were open, but the church itself was so fearful. And what we didn't realize is that these are the times that churches are really needed, and they're really needed to function. Now, a lot of churches did, try to find other means to communicate with their parishioners. A lot of them use Zoom and other forms of social media to hold services. But, I have my doubts as to how effective that all was. And now that everything is opening back up, I'll be curious to see how many churches become full again, or if it was a trend that started before the church and the pandemic sped it up. Let us see if the church is going to start to get full again. But the church was fearful of the pandemic, and I think we should have demonstrated a little more fortitude, a little more bravery, and a little more ministry in terms of meeting the needs of the people. That's just my thought. And then another thing I noticed, that the church was fearful of the government. Government had assumed a lot of powers during the pandemic, and because supposedly of the pandemic, they assumed a lot of powers which encroached on the idea of separation between church and state, that the government would not in any way inflict laws or rules which would cover the church. There's a separation there. It's written into our Constitution and bylaws that the government will not interfere in church, but yet they did. And I would have to say that the churches basically allowed them to do that, either because of their fear or because of ignorance of the law. The church allowed the government to do that. So all of these things made the church basically ineffective during the pandemic. And to me, that was a big sign of the weakening of the church in our age. And I think we're going to even see that some more. So now notice this, just in terms of our culture, the same forces that hate traditions and the moral values of our society also hate the church and God. Now, like I said, in our political landscape now, especially in this year, 2021, I see no real proponents of the church or of faith in the party that is running things now, which really, really scares me, because our culture appears to be on a downward spiral. And that these same forces that are breaking down the moral values like family, faith, truth, and a whole number of other things that were backbones to our society, I would say that the same lack of moral values, the same cultural identity that we see going on now, that they also hate God. I think I would even dare to say that it is the underlying cause of a lot of this stuff that we see going on in the culture. To me, it's negative, and it's not good for the overall population. To me, it's also no accident that all these things coincide now in the culture versus church battle that we see going on. And for time's sake, I'll just list two of them that I see that are indicative of what I'm trying to say. There's a blurring of the gender lines. We all know that. The difference between male and female is minimized in our culture. And to me, that has led to a lot of other things that are detrimental to our culture. With the blurring of gender lines, you see that you are whatever your identity is, or whatever you feel like. So if I feel like I want to be a woman, then hey, no problem. That's what you identify with. You can go ahead and be that. As opposed to what God says. God says that He created them male and female, and that our identity, whether we are male or female, is based on what category we fall in, whether we are indeed male or female. And that is not something that is changeable. That is something that God has created us with, that we were given at birth, whether we were male or female. And it can't be changed on a whim. It can't be changed just because I don't feel like what I was naturally born to be. And so that is one. The other one, which is really, really big in our culture now, is the emphasis on racial divides and skin color, and all of this talk and all of these issues regarding race, whether it's white privilege or Black Lives Matter. All of these things revolve around race, around what people look like, what people's skin color is. And even when you say it out loud, you have to know that there's something very wrong about that. There's something that just doesn't sit well with you. Whereas God says that we are all one race, the human race, and that we are all equal under God. There's no difference really between us. God does not see race. God does not look at our skin color. He looks at what is on the inside, which is what I believe Dr. Martin Luther King was trying to say when he admonished us to not look at the color of our skin, but the content of our characters. And we have forgotten that. We have moved away from that. Whereas there was a time I thought that we were really beginning to merge into one people in this country. Yes, there's differences. Yes, there's cultural differences. Yes, there'll always be a small number of people who want to use race as their method of gaining power. But now it has blown up to exponential amounts, and either it is a political movement or it's a movement from some other organization or even big business, which tries to make race something to either profit off of it, or to get power over it, or to cause confusion within the society. These are some of the things that follow along with a emphasis on race and the racial divides that I just spoke about. So, unfortunately, the model of the church we have now will either no longer be effective or will be permanently crippled by government, by laws, by legislation, by pressure. And so what are we to do, those of us who are real Christians? And I'm going to explore that in the next couple of videos. But one of the things that I think that we're going to have to do, that we're going to be forced to do, because the current church organizations are not able to, is we're going to have to start instituting house churches. And I think, unfortunately, that things are going to get so bad, within our culture, within our society, and that the church is going to get blamed for so much of the ills of society, because real churches will stand up for moral principles, that we are going to get banned. We are going to, they're going to find laws. They're going to create laws that will limit our ability to worship together. They're going to call, churches bastions of evil and hindering society. They're going to do all this, and they're already doing it already. So I think we need to be prepared. Not that we're waving the red, white flag. Not that we're giving up, but we need to adjust how we do things if we're going to be effective. Because, in my opinion, they're coming after us, and I would have never thought that the church would be ineffective during the pandemic for the most part. Like I said, there were some churches that stood up and were effective in ministering to people. But for the most part, you heard nothing really of the church in any kind of outlet, any kind of media, or you didn't even hear, talk of the church, social media, about people's lives really being changed during this pandemic. I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were people that were doing work, and that people were being blessed, and people were coming to know God during the pandemic. But in terms of the church itself, the church model that we have now making a big impact, I did not see that. So I think we need to change. So let's look into that. Let's think about that. And God bless you. And I will see you next time.